This was so inspiring to hear my fellow panelists. I thought I would talk about schools and their role in supporting civic infrastructure, including civic infrastructure around health. And many of you may know, but it may have been forgotten over the last 50 years because schools have been so much treated as engines of economic development over the last 50 years. But public schools in the United States were founded as crucibles of democracy, and that was their main purpose, actually. And it was the main reason that the government funded them, and that there was an effort to get first a broad spectrum of white students and then eventually a broad spectrum of students overall into public schools. It was as a way of building democratic capacity and democratic attitudes among kids, with a lot of caveats, right, around what it meant to have democratic attitudes, including, of course, features of American democracy, which have been strong over the years, including anti-democratic attitudes like white supremacy. But the purpose of schools have been for many, many years to promote American democracy with all of its strengths and flaws. That has gotten lost over about the last half century, but has actually regained some focus over the last couple of decades. And so what I want to talk about is just how schools do function as supporters of the civic infrastructure in sort of their best form. And then what we are kind of seeing both in terms of the ways in which they're strengthening the civic infrastructure now and some of the challenges that they're facing. So there are four important ways, I think, in which schools do help to strengthen students' civic knowledge, civic skills, civic attitudes, and civic participation and eventual access to an exercise of power. The first and most obvious is the curriculum, right? What we teach kids directly about civics, about, say, both formal government, also civil society, nonprofits, levers of power, et cetera. And about history, right? Because there's both direct civic education about the means by which people, both citizens and people who are living inside the United States as legal residents or as visitors or as undocumented residents, et cetera, and people, of course, outside of the United States have all contested over how to exercise power within society here, right? But then there's also the historical dimensions, which are equally important for thinking about student civic learning, right? How we teach history, what history we teach, whose history we teach, and the ways in which students come to think about history, including the power of historical narrative as one lever of power, in fact, in our shared civic society as a whole, right? How we tell history and how we shape our current challenges in the light of history is one important element of civic engagement. A second realm in which schools contribute to student civic learning is through pedagogy, right? So no matter what we teach, how we teach it also has a significant impact on kids. Are they invited to actually speak up and express their ideas? Are minority views in the classroom welcome and even encouraged? Who is it we hear from, and who is it who sits silent? Who is disciplined and who is not, right? The third piece is the co-curriculum and the extracurriculum. So there's both direct courses on civics and on history, as well as the things like debate, newspaper, media, student government, et cetera. And then the fourth is school culture. So the things that happen in the hallways and the cafeteria and the bathrooms, again, as to whether or not kids feel as if they are respected, treated equally, et cetera, all contributes to what students learn about their own civic status and their own civic capacities. Now, these things have been actually improving, as I said, in the last couple of decades with respect to much stronger research about the strength of civic pedagogy, civic curricula, the co-curriculum and extracurriculum, and what we can be doing in school culture. There have been stronger standards being developed and something called the C3 frameworks for college, career, and civic life coming out of the National Council for the Social Studies, a newer curriculum proposal called Educating for American Democracy that is a bipartisan or really multi-partisan initiative that is a work that's actually coming through Congress. That's a $1 billion initiative to try to support civic education. And from the National Academy of Education, the Civic Reasoning and Discourse initiative. However, as many of you have seen, there are also current challenges, and that's where I want to end, to this sort of burgeoning of civic education and civic engagement in schools. There have been, if you go to Chalkbeat and look for, say, anti-CRT map or even racism map, you'll see a map of state-level legislation that is being passed in a number of states around the country, where there's work that is trying to actually reduce the ways in which we teach history and we teach civics in order to take out many of the powerful pedagogies and many of the empowering new, much more inclusive and egalitarian approaches to history education that have been developed over the last few decades in order to try to create a more equitable and inclusive civic infrastructure. And that's, I think, one of the chief challenges that we face.